From small dreams to big empires, James Griffin's journey to revenge with success and change. James Griffin, an aspiring businessman, stood in front of the mirror in his small apartment, adjusting his tie. He looked at himself, telling himself that today was a great opportunity to prove that his years of nonstop work were not meaningless. With an inconspicuous suit and a briefcase full of documents, he left, preparing to face skeptical glances at the family dinner. It wasn't just an ordinary dinner. Hosted at the lavish mansion of his sister, Lily, and her husband, Alexander, this dinner was a chance for James to present the biggest idea of his life. A multi-billion-dollar sustainable urban development project. With support from Monarch Bank, where Alexander holds the position of vice president, this project could become a milestone that would change his entire career. Lily greeted him at the door. Her appearance was luxurious, but her eyes were a little distant. "You look professional," she said, but the compliment didn't sound sincere. James realized that his sister had changed a lot since she got married. She used to be the one who always stood by him, protecting him from bullies, but now she seemed to be caught up in Alexander's frivolous world. Entering the dining room, James immediately felt an atmosphere of power. The long table is decorated with expensive dishes and light from a sparkling crystal chandelier. Alexander, in his expensive Italian suit, sits in a central position, like a king ruling his kingdom. "Ah, James, the brilliant businessman of the family," Alexander spoke in an ironic tone, drawing laughter from the guests who were all bank executives. James sat down calmly, placing his briefcase on the table. He knew all eyes were waiting for a failed performance. But he didn't let those sarcasm hold him back. This time, he came not only to convince them of the project, but also to lay the groundwork for his own overthrow. Dinner begins, and with it, the story of confrontation gradually unfolds. James just needs to wait for the right time to enter his game. The sound of glasses colliding creates a polite melody in the luxurious space of the dining room. James Griffin sat at the end of the table, watching Alexander, his brother-in-law, smug as a king in the center of the party. Alexander raised his glass of wine, a sarcastic smile evident on his face. "James, the family's small investment genius, brought another big project?" he emphasized, lengthening the wording as if to highlight his skepticism. Laughter of approval rang out from the guests, all powerful people in the banking industry. James clenched his hands in his heart, but he still looked calm on the outside. He knew that this dinner was not a place where people would listen to him seriously, but it was the beginning of a game change. "This time, not only is the project big," James said in a calm voice, "but it also has the potential to change the whole way we grow our community." He opened the briefcase, pulled out a laptop, and showed the first slides. "This is a $2 billion sustainable development plan, with housing, commercial facilities, and public utilities integrated." Alexander stopped laughing and instead raised a mocking eyebrow. $2 billion? James, are you crazy? Look at your suit. Who do you think would trust someone like you with that money? The other guests laughed, laughter mixed with pity. Lily, James's sister, sat quietly, her eyes a little wry, but she didn't say a word. James remained calm, even though anger was simmering inside. "I don't need your approval for this idea," he replied, looking straight at Alexander. "I just need you to look at the numbers and the potential of the project. But it seems I was probably confused about my willingness to invest in something really meaningful." Alexander slammed his hand on the table, stood up, his eyes full of contempt. "James, let me tell you what real business is. It's not about building community or dreaming. It's about power, something you don't have." The dinner ended with a mocking laugh, but James didn't notice. In his pocket, his phone vibrated with a message. "The document is complete. He is currently the largest shareholder of Monarch Bank. Tomorrow's council meeting will be very interesting." James took a sip of wine, smiling slightly. Tonight, they laughed at him. But tomorrow, the chess situation will change. The next morning, James Griffin walked into Monarch Bank's headquarters with a completely different demeanor. The suit that was sewn from last night was still in its folds, but now it is no longer important. What he brings is confidence and a strategy that has been meticulously prepared over the course of a decade. The security guard in the main hall looked at him suspiciously, as if ready to stop him at any time. But before he could explain, a familiar voice rang out. "Mr. Griffin, everything is ready." It was Sarah Chen, James's trusted lawyer, waiting for him in front of the elevator. They walked in, and Sarah gave an update on the situation. "The board of directors is here, ready to hear Alexander's big announcement about the acquisition of Rivera Bank." She smiled mischievously. "But they don't know that the agenda has changed." The elevator opened on the top floor, leading directly to the council meeting room. The heavy wooden door opened, revealing a light-filled room where men and women in expensive suits were waiting. At the head of the table, Alexander was standing, a smug smile still on his face. "James, what are you doing here?" Alexander asked, his voice a little annoyed when he saw James enter. "This is a closed meeting," he continued, but was interrupted by Sarah, who placed a thick stack of documents on the table. "Mr. Williams," said Sarah, "James Griffin not only has the right to attend, but also presides over this meeting." Alexander frowned, opening the document. His face turned from surprise to pale as he read the first lines. "Impossible," he muttered. James sat down slowly, looking directly at Alexander. "It's true. Since this morning, I have owned 51% of Monarch Bank." The room exploded. The council members rushed and hurriedly read through the documents. Alexander, now losing his confidence, tried to find an excuse. "This is a deception. It's impossible for you to buy so many shares without us knowing." James turned on the big screen, projected a network of companies and trades, subsidiaries, silent partners, and strategic investments. "While he was busy expanding and venturing, I built a solid foundation. Everything is legal, Alexander. You've been so busy despising small dreams that you forget to look around." Alexander stepped back, his expression full of shock. But the final blow was waiting. "The acquisition of Rivera Bank that you plan to announce?" James smiled, his voice soft but sharp. "No need. Rivera belonged to me 3 months ago." The room fell silent, and Alexander collapsed in his chair. For the first time in his life, he was a complete failure. James, with a calm look, prepares to move on to the next chapter: the fall of Alexander and the rebirth of Monarch Bank. In the Monarch Bank boardroom, Alexander sat down in his chair, his face shocked when it was clear he was no longer in charge. James Griffin, whom he once despised, quietly devised an unexpected plan, taking over 51% of the bank's shares and exposing Alexander's mistakes to the entire board. "It's not over," Alexander muttered, but his voice lacked confidence. James didn't answer. Instead, he projected a series of documents onto the screen. "This is a list of venture capitals, illegal transactions, and personal expenses that Alexander has covered up in the name of banking," he said, his voice calm but powerful. "These acts not only caused the loss of assets for Monarch Bank, but also seriously violated financial regulations." The council members whispered, their gaze gradually shifting from Alexander to James, clearly realizing that Alexander's time was over. The atmosphere became more tense when Sarah, James's lawyer, stepped forward and placed another document in front of Alexander. "This is an announcement from an independent auditor," she said. "They have detected a series of suspicious transactions related to his personal account, and the FBI will step in to investigate in detail." Alexander turned pale. He tried to stand up, but his legs seemed to have no strength. "Rebecca? Where's Rebecca?" he muttered, calling his wife's name. As if to answer, the door of the meeting room opened. Rebecca walked in, her face pale but her eyes full of determination. "I'm here, Alexander," she said, her voice hard, "and I knew everything." Alexander stepped forward, trying to get his wife's support. "Rebecca, I know you do everything for your family. Don't let them ruin us." But Rebecca didn't back down. She turned to James. "I want to know everything," she said. James nodded, gently but firmly. "The whole truth lies here. What Marcus did was not only harm the bank, but also the family." Rebecca picked up the document and read it carefully. Her face gradually changed color as each truth was exposed. At the end, she looked at Alexander without any emotion. "Everything I ever told you was a lie." Alexander had nothing left to justify. The board quickly made a decision. Alexander had to resign immediately and transfer all remaining interests to James to save the bank. Rebecca, tears rolling down her cheeks, walked out of the room. James looked at his sister, feeling a sadness creep through the victory. He knew that, Even if he had overthrown Alexander, the wounds he had caused would take a long time to heal. However, with this turning point, James had a plan in place to rebuild Monarch Bank, making it a financial institution that focused on community and business ethics, something Alexander never understood. He knew that this was just the beginning. After the fateful meeting, James Griffin officially took over the control of Monarch Bank. With a 51% stake in hand and the consensus of the board, he began to rebuild an organization that had been abused under Alexander's leadership. The immediate challenge is not only to restore the bank's reputation, but also to create a business model that truly brings value to the community. For the first few weeks, James worked non-stop. He holds meetings with department heads, reviews each investment, and prioritizes projects that are sustainable and support small businesses. One of the biggest changes was the rollout of a microcredit support program for startups, which Alexander once considered unbothersome. Rebecca, his sister, almost disappeared in the early days after the shock of Alexander's downfall. But then, late one afternoon, she showed up at James's office. Her face was emaciated, but her gaze was no longer as lost as before. "I need to talk to you," she said, her voice light but firm. James nodded, inviting her to sit down. Rebecca began to tell, opening up about her life to Alexander for the first time. "He made me believe that everything is only valuable when it is admired by others. Parties, expensive bags, and even fake praise from social friends. But in the end, it's all an empty shell." James listened silently, letting Rebecca pour out her heart. When she stopped, he said, "Rebecca, you don't have to live in someone else's shadow. You used to be a strong person who protected you when we were little. I can do more than that." Rebecca looked at him, her eyes gleaming. "I want to do it again. I don't know where to start, but I want to do something meaningful." James smiled. "I think you have an idea." He introduced her to a charity project he was planning, an organization that supports disadvantaged children. Rebecca, who had dreamed of doing something for children but had never had the chance, immediately agreed to participate. With James' help, Rebecca founded the Hope for Tomorrow organization, which is dedicated to providing scholarships, education, and accommodation to children in need. From a woman caught up in a frivolous society, she gradually finds meaning in life by helping others. As Rebecca embarks on her new journey, James finds that the relationship between the two brothers is gradually healing. In rare family gatherings, they sit down and reminisce about the past, laughing and joking like they did when they were children. James knew that it was much easier to rebuild a bank than to rebuild trust, but as he watched Rebecca rediscover herself, he felt the fight was worth it. And now he is about to enter a new chapter in his journey, not only changing a bank, but also changing the way he sees the power of small dreams. One morning, while James Griffin was reviewing new community projects at the office, his assistant announced a surprise visitor. It was Marcus, who used to be Alexander, his brother-in-law. Marcus's face looked more emaciated. The usual look of complacency and arrogance was now gone. The expensive suit was replaced with a simple, modest suit. "James," Marcus said, his voice deep and hesitant, "I came to sign the final papers related to the transfer of shares. Rebecca told me to bring them." James nodded, inviting Marcus to sit down. Marcus placed the document on the table, but did not leave immediately. He sat down, his eyes looking down, as if trying to find words to speak. "You know," Marcus began, "I've been thinking a lot since it all came crashing down. Not just because I lost money or power, but because I realized I lost something bigger." James didn't say anything, waiting for Marcus to continue. "I had a chance," Marcus admitted, his voice getting smaller. "An opportunity to do something meaningful. You gave me that opportunity, but I was so blind because of ambition, because of the so-called power, that I missed it. Now, looking at the way he manages the bank, the way Rebecca finds herself, I realized that I was wrong." Marcus paused, his eyes filled with regret. "I don't want you to forgive, but I want you to know that I'm sorry for what I've done to you, to Rebecca, and to all the people I've ever looked down on." James nodded quietly, his voice calm. "I accept your apology, Marcus, but it's your responsibility to fix what you've done." Marcus smiled faintly and stood up. "I'll try, even if it's too late." Watching Marcus leave, James felt a strange sense of relief. He knew Marcus had lost everything, but realizing his mistake was a start. Now James can focus entirely on building the future, not from what has been lost, but from what he is willing to create. A year after taking control of Monarch Bank, James Griffin stood in front of the building that changed its name to Griffin and Partners Financial Group. The new logo sparkles on the glass wall, a symbol of innovation and trust. The space inside is now filled with positive energy, with enthusiastic young employees and meetings to discuss projects that bring benefits to the community. James walked through the office floors, seeing a noticeable change. The young analyst who was once scolded by Marcus is now the leader of the development of microcredit programs. The junior employees no longer cringe every time they meet the leader, but instead smile and confidence. Banking is not just a place to work, but has become part of the community. On the 10th floor, a special area is dedicated to Rebecca's Hope for Tomorrow charity.